Hi you guys, and welcome back to my channel. We're going to talk some more about permaculture gardening. We're going to discuss what it is and why you want to use it for yourself, whether you are a survivalism enthusiast or you just looking to grow some food for yourself and your family in your backyard in an urban setting. I can help you with that. Why permaculture gardening? Let's start with what is permaculture gardening. Permaculture gardening is mimicking Mother Nature as closely as possible. So when we look at Mother Nature, what do we see? We see biodiversity. What does that mean? Well, we see life in all forms intermixed together, both in plants and in insects and all the way down to the tiniest bits of life that you can't see without a microscope. So in this video, we're also going to start a little bit of intro into soil biology. I'm going to keep it simple, I promise, and you can dive as much down that rabbit hole as you would like to, but a basic understanding of soil biology will be hugely beneficial to any person trying to grow a garden and do it in as organic of a way as possible. So here in this garden, we do no sprays, we do no fertilizers, organic or not. We don't use any sort of pesticides, again, organic or not. We don't do anything like that. What we do here is biodiversity. So if you look at the example behind me, you will notice that it's all very green, it's all very healthy, and it's intermixed and interplanted. There are no like big gaps and spaces and holes in areas where the soil is exposed. That's another thing. And the no dig part, that's again going to come into play when it comes to not disturbing the life that's in your soil, that is so delicate and so tiny and so easy to harm. You adding any sort of fertilizers, you adding recommended from online things like I've heard hydrogen peroxide in water, soap mixed with water. These sorts of things, while they might not be immediately damaging to the life that is present, it actually is not good. You don't want to change the chemistry of your soil in a way that you can't, gauge exactly what it is that you're doing. Hydrogen peroxide will kill a lot more than just bad guys. On the surface of all of your leaves and all of your fruit, there is colonies and colonies and colonies of your different life forms. And a lot of them, just like the bacteria and fungi that are in our bodies, they're actually doing good for us. They're required, they need to be there. They're a part of our biology just as much as everything else is. You know what I mean? So intermixing your things is great. It also mitigates pest issues. So when you have a huge row of something, like let's say tomatoes, that's a huge call out to the tomato hornworm. They're going to be like, oh, tomatoes, and they'll know exactly where to go, and they can wipe out your entire crop. If you have them spread out, it helps with that. Also, like if they get to one, they won't likely get to all of them or even a lot of them. They'll just likely get to one or two. So that keeps you from losing your crop. From a survivalist standpoint, the reason why I think that this is such a great way to garden is because you don't need to have special equipment. You don't need to have access to fertilizers. You don't need to have access to pesticides. You don't have to have access to, honestly, anything but seeds and some sort of digging material, like your shovels and stuff. So everything else is done by hand. I pull weeds by hand. I let the weeds live. Weeds have a really important job. Whether you like it or not, weeds are necessary. They grow really quickly. They are an annual. So they don't survive the winter. And most weeds, not all weeds, but a lot of weeds create really large, thick tap roots that go really deep into the soil, way past the surface level of the soil, down deeper, where they're actually mining certain things. So like your dandelions, they're going down there and they're mining a bunch of calcium, other things too, but primarily a bunch of calcium. They bring that into themselves. They put it in their taproot, they put it in their leaves, they put it in their flowers, they put it in them. And then when they die, the organisms that are in your soil, assuming you haven't nuked them with a bunch of pesticides and stuff, those organisms can pretty quickly and easily break that down and put those nutrients back into the cycle right there at the top level, as opposed to being down low where they were mining from. Now it's raised up and it's now available closer to the surface, so that your new seedlings and things like that will have immediate access to them. So I try not to like wipe out weeds. That's actually really bad for you. So I just don't let them take over. You know, it's like if it's going to be between the weed or the plant that I'm intentionally growing, obviously I'm going to thin back the weeds. I also don't uproot weeds as much as possible. Like I don't go in there digging heavily with a hoe, maybe just like a little bit of scraping here and then just manipulating the top level of soil a little bit. But you don't want to disturb your soil too much. When we lift up the soil, we're taking some of those nutrients, exposing them to oxygen. We're taking those very, very fragile little creatures, those bacteria, your fungal, your bacteria, your nematodes, etc. All of these guys are really, really tiny and really, really fragile, and if you disturb their home, some of them will die and others will kind of make their way out. Also with your plants that you're growing, when you harvest them, any of them that have a substantial root network, go ahead and leave the root network in place, because a lot of your life is sitting right there up underneath the roots. The plants photosynthesize, they turn the sun energy into carbs and sugars. Those carbs and sugars are used by the plant to they put it into their leaves, they put it into their roots, they put it into those sorts of things. But what science has found is that a lot of those carbs, those sugars, are being traded. They're being put back into the edges of their roots and pushed into the soil. They're being traded with other organisms. They're also able to put out certain signals that will tell your soil, well, the life in your soil, what your plant needs. So you can look at your plant and think, oh, it's got yellow on it, so it must need more nitrogen, or it's a little bit yellow, so it's probably suffering from chlorosis or something like that, right? Well, that's all fine and dandy if you want to try to like prescribe your plants, but your plant already knows exactly what it needs, and odds are that nutrient that it needs is already there. If it's not getting it, it's because your plant needs life. Where does life come from? Life is literally everywhere, and the best thing that you can do for your garden is put compost. Compost. That's how you retain moisture. That's how you create movement through the soil, so that way roots and things like that can pass through. You need life, you need insects, you need that biology, you need all of those things in place in order for your plant to actually thrive. Mother Nature already figured it all out. All we've got to do is kind of try to mimic her a little bit. So right behind me, you'll see that I have squash that I planted, and they went up and over that trellis. Below them, I have 2 different tomato plants, and they are different varieties, one a yellow, one a red. And then next to it, another tomato plant. And then next to that, we have cosmos. And then below that, we have 3 different jalapeno peppers. And then we have a row of green beans. We have some little flowers popped in, some super beanias, some super petunias. We have our strawberry plants. We have a row of corn with pole beans wrapped up and around this trellis. Another thing of pole beans wrapped up there. We've got a sunflower, more cosmos. We have more squash varieties. That is 2 cabbages that were recently planted out, went over here. So the idea is just intermixing. You don't want to have too many things from the same family all in one place. You know what I mean? So you don't want to have a whole bunch of brassicas all together, because that's just perfect for your moths and your caterpillars and things like that to come in, and they'll just make themselves at home like they should. So permaculture gardening means minimal amount of equipment, no use of any sort of fertilizers, no use of any sort of pesticides, organic or not. Your soap and water mixture, no. Your hydrogen peroxide and water mixture, no. Your a bug and slug killer, no. Almost everything that you put on your soil that claims that it kills this also kills a bunch of other things, whether you know it or not. And it can affect and change the pH level of your soil, and all these things that can actually make it harder for your plant to thrive. So you think you're doing it a favor, but you're really not. So here comes in the intro to soil biology. Okay, so your soil is your substrate, so your type of soil, whether it's clay, whether it's grassy knoll or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. If it's sandy, it doesn't matter. It has all of the nutrients already there. It's been tested by scientists. They've tested soil samples from all over the planet, and they have found this to be true, that essentially 98 point some odd percent of the soil that's available, it has every element from the periodic table already in it, and enough of each element to supply hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years worth of plant life. What we're doing wrong, okay, is we go and we look at mass agriculture. What's the difference there? There's so many, but let's look at the key things. Number one, they till the soil. So when we go in and we dig up that soil and we move it, the top foot or so of soil has so much life that's in that top part of soil. Also, the nitrogen the nitrate that is stored in that soil by a lot of organisms, primarily mycelium, which is a part of the fungal community. They store that stuff down in the ground. Trees also store this stuff down underground, and when they're taking in that nitrogen, they put it down as nitrate into the soil. Once we till it up, we're now moving it back up to the surface. It reaches the oxygen. Now it becomes nitrogen. Now we have a greenhouse gas. So not only are we doing harm to our planet by doing this, but we're also harming our soil. So try to avoid manipulating your soil as much as possible. The next example of what mass ag does, huge fields with one plant. So they have no choice. They have to use pesticides. They have to use fertilizers, because they're depleting the soil of the same nutrient over and over and over again. They're tilling up that soil so that life that was there is now gone and dead. So the only way the next plants are going to be able to thrive is by, again, adding your fertilizers, adding all of these things to basically put a big ass band-aid over a really bad situation. So mass ag, while it is important and we need to have that, without it, we'll starve, it would be so much less needed if every person tried to grow just a few things. Pick one or two things that your family eats a lot of, and grow it yourself. Find a way, whether it's containers. I have plenty of examples of container gardening, whether it's in a little greenhouse that you have set up, whether it's on your back porch, it does not matter. As long as you have some bit of direct sunlight and you have a container with soil in it, you can make this happen. You can buy compost. A really good tip for buying compost: stick your nose right on it. If it smells like poo or funky at all, no. If it just smells fresh, like soil, like the forest floor, that's good compost. That means all of the elements in there that were originally came from any sort of anaerobic environment have been completely processed down and have reached the point where they are now ready to be put on the ground. You want to avoid using manure unless it's been fully composted first. So if you take the manure and you throw it on your compost bin, then you'll be in a better place. Now, compost sounds complicated. Really, it's not. You're just gonna throw everything, anything, all the things into your compost bin. I made this compost bin from recycled materials. This is parts from an old table. These are the bottom pieces that held the mattress in place for one of my daughter's former beds that she used to use. Down in there, these are pieces from an old like a greenhouse, I guess you could call it. It was kind of like a greenhouse, had like little shelves in it. And then I put the tarp in there just to hold on to all of the things. And I put several holes, though, all over the tarp so that it has air coming in and the water has a way to make its way out. And then in here I put my scraps. So this is a plant that I bought at a nursery, and I had it outside in 110 degree weather, and this is what we're left with, right? So I will eventually come in and we'll kind of chop up and break up the top, like the big chunks and stuff, because you want it smaller than this. but you're just gonna put it all in here. This is from my guinea pig cage. This had like poo, guinea pig poo, all of that in there. If you find a dead rat in your gutter, throw that in there. Anything that is carbon based, which is essentially everything, can go in there, and it can be broken down. And the more diverse that is, the better. That way you're going to get more and more and more life. You're going to get all of the goods. You want a really nice blend. Also, with your permaculture gardening, you want to aim for like predator prey, like neutrality. Big truck going by. Predator prey neutrality. So you don't want to have no pests. You really don't, because if you have no pests, you have no predators. No predators will come in to take care of your pests. So if you don't have anything that ladybugs want to eat, they're not going to hang out. If you don't have anything that bees want to graze on, they're not going to come around. So you want to make sure that all of your plantings and everything that you have set up is set up in a way where you can let nature kind of do its thing. I did add worms and stuff. I went and bought some worms from a gas station, and I had put probably like 10 or so of the little, you can buy little styrofoam cups. I probably put about 10 of those, and I spread them out throughout all of the garden beds. And they're doing a great job. They colonize. I also bought a bunch of the red worms, and I put them in the compost bin because they do a great job of breaking down the bigger chunks. And then what comes out, those worm castings, that's still not composted, by the way. Worm castings are not the same thing as compost. It is also not immediate nutrient for your plants. That's a misunderstanding. But it is broken down small enough to where your actual good guys that are going to do the composting are able to colonize on each little tiny little bit much faster and break it down more efficiently. So you get your worm castings, and then you still need that life to break those worm castings down so that they actually plant ready material, so that your plants can actually take it up. Watering, you'll find that using this sort of method, you have to water less. You'll notice that you do get some weeds, but they tend to not take over. They tend to kind of stay in their realm. Every once in a while with the bind weeds and certain really aggressive ones, I do have to go in there on a regular and kind of rip those guys out a bit. I try to get them up from the root a bit, but not all the way, because again, I'd rather have the weeds present than destroy my soil life. So I do, each time I rip them up, yeah, they're still coming back because I didn't get the whole root, but they're coming back much weaker. And so, after a while, they're no longer an issue. But because of what we have set up and the way that we set it up, I haven't lost any crops to pests. I have lost a few things to squirrels. So, if that's an issue that you struggle with, I suggest the live traps. I have several of them now. They even have like a peanut spray that you can spray into the live trap, which just kind of pulls them in there so that they want to go in and get those peanuts. The trap door closes, the squirrel is unharmed, and then I take it to a nearby park and I let it live its best life. Squirrels aren't intentionally trying to harm anything. They like to plant or to bury their nuts and things like that right up next to or right up underneath of plant roots. And the reason being is that these plants provide perfect markers for the squirrels to come back later. They will recognize the plant, they will recognize the area, and they can find their nut again. But in that process, they tend to dig up some seedlings, which happened to me a lot. Sometimes they completely destroy the root network enough to where the plant will die. So these sorts of things, those sorts of pest issues I do deal with. I lost a bunch of corn because a large dog kind of made its way through there. I don't have my area fenced off to keep the large guys out. But as far as like pests from like aphid problems, no aphid problems. Issues with not getting properly pollinated is also not a problem. I have a huge amount of bees that love my property. I also don't mow all the time. That way all of these little guys, they can grow. These are clover flowers. Also, your dandelions and things like that. There's like big beacons in my big green yard that call those pollinators in, those butterflies, those everything. So this is going to conclude the second part to permaculture gardening. And then we're really going to start diving into plants and plant placement, and a little bit more about soil life and a little bit more about composting in our next video. So thank you for hanging out, all of you survivalism peoples. You keep on surviving, you keep on practicing, you keep staying ready, and I'll do the same, and I'll see you guys in the next one.